Hello, welcome back. I hope you're all good and well. I'm actually doing a video indoors today, which is quite rare. The reason for that is, well, as you may be able to hear outside my window, the weather is appalling. It's absolutely chucking it down. So I thought I'd do this video indoors. And this video is about selected stories by Edward Lee. I've just finished reading this one, and I suppose I chose to read this book because I recently read Header by Edward Lee. You may have seen the video a little while ago. That got me in the mood to reading more of Edward Lee's work, short stories, and I had a great time actually. It was a very fun read. Right from the get-go, it was full of gross, hideous descriptions of sex and violence and what have you, and right from the start I could tell that the author hadn't held back at all. He just went for it. He didn't care about offending anyone or upsetting anyone. You know, you just read about murders and rapes and just sexual scene after sexual scene. But I knew that going in. That's what I wanted, really. It's good. A great read. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't perfect. The first thing I noticed was that there are supposed to be 10 stories in the book, but about 3 of those stories are actually Header stories. Like his book Header, he's kind of done 3 variants. Or in fact, I think story number 1 in this book is actually the first draft of the Header story. I think that's what it is. That's number 1. And halfway through the book there are another 2 Header stories that are kind of the same story. They're like part 1 and part 2. And so for that reason, you could say that there's 9 stories in the book instead of 10. I felt a little bit cheated there when I discovered that. That was a little bit disappointing. Another slight criticism is there are 1 or 2 stories in this book that kind of lean towards being supernatural. There's one story where a woman kind of turns into a leathery skeleton right in front of somebody due to some kind of magic. And there's another story about a Colombian drug dealer, and there's a kind of voodoo theme, like a kind of black magic theme going on in that story. And that's fine if you like that, but I personally, I'm not into supernatural stuff. I like stories to be grounded in the laws of physics, if you know what I mean. So for me that was a bit of a down point as well. I also noticed Edward Lee, the author, is American. This is an American book by an American author. And so of course there are loads of religious references in it. Some of the characters in the story come out with like religious dialogue. You know, that if something shocking happens to them, they'll say, "Oh, Jesus Christ," or there's a story where somebody's been kidnapped and he's like praying to God to get rescued and that. Again, to some people this won't matter at all, but I'm just not into that stuff either. I'm not into supernatural stuff, and I'm not into religion. And so it kind of got a little bit annoying for me. Although I can't quite tell whether Edward Lee is mocking religion or whether he's putting this stuff in his stories because he's religious himself. I haven't quite decided that. And by the way, I've done research about this in the past. I've often wondered why America is so religious compared to Britain. I mean, things are changing in Britain now with other religions rising in dominance, but traditionally, Britain is not that religious. Britain is quite atheistic in many ways, but America is like a Bible bashing country. I've done a little bit of research into why this is, and I read that it kind of stems back to the Cold War, or the kind of friction between the US and the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union was communist, of course, and so they weren't religious. And so the US wanted to distance itself from the Soviet Union as much as possible. And it wanted to be as different from the Soviet Union as possible. And so it turned itself religious. Religion was promoted by the government, just so that the US became completely different from the Soviet Union. I think that's why the US is so religious. I might be wrong, and if you do know the true answer to this, do tell me in the comments, because I'm quite curious about this. So they're my main criticisms. It's a bit supernatural and a bit religious in parts, but it is a very good book overall. Maybe I'm being a bit too pedantic here. It's a fun book. Oh, and also one more thing I've just remembered. If you look at the cover of this book, at first glance it looks like a typical horror, a horror cover, a playful horror book cover. But if you look closely, on the wall there's actually a religious painting. It looks like the Virgin Mary or something. And if you look at that fat man on the sofa, he's actually wearing a crucifix. I noticed these details after I made these observations. Just a little thing to look at there. But anyway, going on to the actual scenes. These sick, grotesque scenes. If you're going to read this book, I should warn you about two scenes in particular. The first one is within one of the header stories, and they're kind of torturing this man, and they're using a method called hot balling. This actually shocked me, and I'm not easily shocked. Should I describe it to you? No, I won't describe it. It's too much. And I'll describe the second one. In the last story, somebody gets kidnapped and they're chained to the floor and they're left there for days on end with a bucket to go to the toilet into. They've got to shit in a bucket and piss in a bucket. And towards the end, the kidnappers actually hold the back of his head and dunk his head in the bucket and choke him in his own shit and piss. Now, if you think that's bad, think about hot balling. What might that be? I'm not even willing to describe that on this video. So what could hot balling be? Use your imagination there. I've finished this book now, so does it make me want to read any more books by Edward Lee after reading this one? I've read Header, I enjoyed that. I've read this and I mostly enjoyed it. I think I will probably read another Edward Lee book in the future, yes. Whether that will be a book of short stories or a full-length novel, I'm not sure. I'm going to do a little bit more research. Do I feel like I've learnt anything after reading this book? Well, no. I suppose that's another weak point. You don't really feel like you've learnt much after reading an Edward Lee book, other than the fact that hillbillies in the US like to have sex a lot. That's probably the main lesson that you learn after reading an Edward Lee book. Okay, right, I'm doing a 10-star rating now. What does Selected Stories get? Can't give it 10 stars. Can't give it 9 stars. 6 stars is too low, so it's got to be 7 or 8. I'm going to give it 7 stars. 7 out of 10. That might seem a bit harsh, but it is quite a big score still. I did enjoy the book. I can't give it a really high score because there are technically 9 stories instead of 10, and there's that supernatural stuff as well. But if you're into shocking horror, and if you're into short stories, I do recommend it. You'll probably enjoy this one. And it's fairly cheap as well. It's about £2.30 or something like that. Alright, so 7 out of 10 for Selected Stories by Edward Lee. What else have I got to say? Remember, the 10th of December is a date to put in your diary. That's the release date of The Hand That Pulls You Under. Become a member of jamesflynn.org, and I'll be back in about a week or two with another book review. I'm not sure what it will be yet, so I'll let it be a surprise, okay? Thanks very much for watching, and until next time, try to have a great day on this peculiar, fascinating, intense rock we call Earth. Goodbye.